Hi guys, my name is Dennis. I love to make touch designer YouTube tutorials and stuff. I've been quite active for past 5 years in Russian speaking community of touch designer, but since 1.5 years now I've moved to Berlin and joined a beautiful White Void team. So I haven't been too active on the tutorials front ever since, but now I have my vacation and I'm ready to make some new tutorials in English. I want to talk to you about TDU dependency. Sounds very depressing, but it's a good thing actually, very, very good. So we're gonna see some examples and what's the idea behind this dependency class and how can we use it inside Touch Designer. And the documentation actually is pretty good, but I know that some people, like myself included, I prefer to watch YouTube videos. For some reason, it's easier for me to understand some topics like that. So I hope it will help you as well. So let's jump right in. All right, so here we are. Here's the Touch Designer, and note that I'm using currently the latest available version. And this is important to use version 2022 and above, because some features, like one particular feature that they introduced, I want to show it to you, and it's only available in these branches. So the way I like to start presenting a problem is that let's say there's no such thing as TDU dependency. It cracks me up every time I say it, but yeah, let's imagine there's no such feature in Touch Designer, and let's just build some stuff, and we'll see like how this can be actually beneficial and what's why do we need it in the first place. So here I have a very simple program, like a very simplistic interface. So what it does, it allows you to open a folder on your computer, and you can read files from it, and it will create a list of files, but it will show you the movie count. So the idea is like this is actually like a movie bin, and you're supposed to load like a movie folder into it, and then you press read, and it populates the list with like names of the movie files that it found. And and so far what we want to do is this in the UI department, we want to show how many movies have we found. So let's just take a quick look in how the movie bin works. So inside the movie bin there is a simple extension, and there's a parameter execute, so which connects the read and clear button to corresponding callbacks in the extension. So let's take a look at the extension. So extension is quite simple. We just say that we have a movie list, which is a list of strings. And if you're not familiar with this notation, this is what's called a type hint. So take a look at it in the Python documentation. I'm using it and I like it very much, but it's completely optional. Like if we delete this this portion here that I highlighted, nothing will change about the way that our program will execute. But take a quick look, and I think it's especially beneficial in Touch Designer when sometimes it's not very clear what kind of parameters are you passing in or are you expecting. So yeah, we have an owner comp, a standard one, and we have a movie list, which is just a list of strings. So in the end, I just have like a list of file names that I read in. So I don't do anything fancy here. I don't create movie file ins, blah, 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 because it's just for the sake of this simple example, right? We have a property movie list, which returns self movie list. So it returns this list basically. We have another property called movie count, which will return the number of movies that we loaded in. And yeah, internally it simply returns the length of this list. And we have two callbacks, on read pressed and on clear pressed. So on clear pressed is super simple. It just empties the list, so it brings the self movie list back to an empty list. And on read pressed, what it does is that it looks up the path here in the folder. Then there's like a super simple error checking. Like if the movie folder is empty, it will return false. So if not movie folder, it will say no folder selected and will return from this function. But if it's not the case, then it will do this. So we'll just populate the list with the file names that it found in this specified folder. So I can select a folder. I already have it selected, but if you go to a Touch Designer installation folder, go to the samples directory, and you go to the map, you will have all the textures available, like built-in textures. And if you go to the folder called nature, there will actually be five movie clips, MP4 files. So you can select this folder and you can read it. And what will happen if we open up a console, if we say now op movie bin and movie list, right? It was the name of the property, movie list. We will see that actually, let's quickly maybe take a look at this folder, nature, and you see, yeah, we have here 5 movie files. So we now have a list of file names. And also if we ask movie count, which is another property of this extension, it should give us back 5, right? Yeah, and this is the case. So now let's say, like, in general, dependency class, TDU dependency has something to do with what's called observer pattern. So it's the way of implementing the observer pattern in Touch Designer, and you can Google it. It's a very nice design pattern that is meant to decouple things. Let's say it's a big read on Wikipedia. You can take a look. It's very interesting. But in general, what we want to do is that, let's say we now have this movie count. So every time that we press the read button, what we want to happen is we want this UI portion to update. Yeah, and why I brought up this topic of observer pattern and stuff like that is because usually the most prominent place where you can see this kind of problem arise, where you need something like TDU dependency or like observer pattern, is when you're dealing with GUI, when you're dealing with interfaces. Because let's jump back to our example. Let's say when I press the read button, I want my UI to automatically, or like not automatically, but to update. And this counter should now say 5 instead of 0. So right now, this movie count view and the movie bin is not connected at all. So there's no connection, and that's why this will stay 0 forever, right? We want to change that somehow. And so imagine again, we don't have anything like TDU dependency. What can we do? Well, we can go about it 2 ways, actually. We can either push the value from movie bin to the UI, or we can pull the value from the source of this value. In this case, this is a movie bin, right? So let's explore both ways. Strategy number 1, we can push the value every time it changes. We can push it to update the GUI, right? So how can we do it? We can say, let's add another member here called movie count view, right? And this would be TD base comp, and it will be equal to OP, go 1 level above, and what's the name? I forgot. Movie count view. So this would be this operator, right? And now we'll say, we create another function, def update movie count view, right? And we pass self and we pass val. So So what to put inside, right? And this would be an integer. And we will say self movie count view par movie count equals to val. And here on read pressed, so when we have read the movie list, what we want to do now is also to self update movie count view, and we want to update it with the length of movies folder, right? And also we want to do the same when we clear the movie folder. To be consistent, we say here the length of self movie list, and here we also will say length of self movie list. So let's check if it works. Read now returns 5, and if I say clear, it goes back to 0. Nice, so it works, right? The problem solved, right? Yeah, it's solved, but let's see what is not so good about it. So let's take a look at the downsides of this push method. The biggest downside now is that we now, our movie bin class and the component is dependent on this UI element of movie count view, right? And every time we do something, we need to remember that we actually need to also update this view to reflect the current state of this particular integer in this case, right? So why is this bad? Let's say that I want to make this movie count view a part of something bigger in the UI, because my UI is getting bigger, right? And I want to actually make it a child of this container, for example, right? And I say this is my parent UI, for example, something like this. So now what will happen is that if we read, we will get an error. And what error did we get? We have an error which says that TD par collection object has no attribute movie count, right? And why is that? This is because there is no more such element as a movie count view. So we now need to update this path to be what did I name? Parent UI movie count view, and now it will work again, right? So if I say clear, now I have 0 again. If I press read, we have 5 again. So now it's working again. But what's the problem? You see the issue here, right? So every time that we change something about the UI, all of a sudden movie bin stops working. And if you approach it from the like a pure common sense kind of approach, it will make little sense to you, right? If you think about it, like, hey, why is me changing UI has something to do with like movie bin functionality, why it suddenly breaks it. And worst case scenario also, it can be multiple people who works. You can have a designer that works on a parent UI, and you can have like a core developer who works on the movie bin implementation, right? And then designer comes in, make like sexy changes to the UI, and all of a sudden some core components of your project stops working. And this is obviously bad, right? Of course you can make it better. You can make like some explicit list of dependencies and stuff like that, but it's still, it will give you a lot of problems to run it like this. Okay, so we explored the first strategy, which was the push strategy, right? To push something from the component to the UI. Now let's explore the second strategy, when we, as I said, we can also pull, right? So we can ask in the GUI, we can ask, hey, is something changed? Hey, has something changed? Let's explore this this thing. And here we can start with making like a very naive assumption that actually maybe we can already just reference this movie count and be done with it. Let's read, so we know that movie count is now at 5. And let's say here that it's actually is going to be referenced to op movie bin dot movie count, right? Oh, look, it's 5. Okay, so great, it works. The problem here, however, is that if we now do clear, now we know that this is actually 0 now because we cleared it, right? And we can inspect it here. But here nothing changed. How come? Because the way it works in Touch Designer is if you change something inside the class, it doesn't force recook this component, which is referencing this particular value. So in order to recook, you can, for example, go to constant mode, and then you can go back to expression mode, which at that point will re-evaluate this expression, and then you will see, okay, now it's 0. So now we can again read. Now we know it's 5 actually, right? But still here it still says 0. So again, we can go to constant mode, go back to expression mode, and it's 5 now. Okay, so it kind of works, but of course we don't want to manually do it every time we make a change, right? So another way, and this is actually, yeah, it's a very inefficient way of doing it, but just to explore all the possibilities, what we can do here is we can actually say, we can have execute that. So an execute that will run its function on the various conditions. So for example, we can have a function that runs on every start of each frame, right? So let's create a function that runs on every frame start. So now what happens is that on each frame start, we do this. We go to movie bin and check the movie count and put this value of this movie count to movie count of our parent, to this parameter, right? So now every time that it changes, now we see it updates, which kind of works, right? So this is in the end, this is how we want it to be. So like the movie bin works by itself, not knowing about anyone else in the project. It's just, its only purpose is to load the files, right? And the GUI, okay, yeah, it works too. It has a reference to movie bin, so it's dependent on this path of the movie bin, but it's all right. It's fine, and it auto updates. What is bad is that this method, especially when you start executing some larger portion of code here, becomes very inefficient, because it's imagine if you do something like load the movies only once. So you open the project and you only once load the movie list, and then it doesn't change for another, say, 5 hours, right? So you know that for 5 hours nothing gonna change, but this script will steal each frame, so 60 frames per, like 60 times per second. It will ask, hey movie bin, what's the movie count? Oh, okay, 5. Okay, hey movie bin, like after, you know, like 16 milliseconds. Hey movie bin, is it still 5? Ah, okay, cool. Yeah, and it will do it forever. And this is sounds very inefficient, and it is quite inefficient. Especially, yeah, as I said, if you want to do something more than just set the value, right? If you want to perform some logic, it will become progressively ineffective. So this also doesn't work. Okay, so as we can see now, both of these strategies kind of work, but also kind of don't at the same time, right? So it's, yeah, we can make them work, but it's not going to be ideal. And so this is where TDU dependency comes into play. So let's rewrite this example to use TDU dependency, and we will see how it works. So now what we can do is actually, let's say that first of all, we're going to import the TDU module where the dependency class lives, right? And then we say that actually self movie count is going to be another variable, another class attribute, and this is going to be actually now a value of type tdu.Dependency, right? And again, you can omit this colon tdu.Dependency, it's just a type hint. And we will say that actually it's going to be a tdu.Dependency 0. So this is just an integer 0 wrapped in the tdu.Dependency object. And the movie count now will gonna return to us not the length of self movie list, but it will return self movie count, like this. Okay, so and also what we need to do now is on read pressed, we need to make sure that we update the self movie count equals len movies folder. And here's actually I just made a mistake, and this is very common one. This is a big caveat. So actually, when you want to, if I just say self movie count equals len movie folder, what is len movie folder? We know that in our example it's 5, right? So what it will do is that it will just assign value 5 to variable movie count, and it will effectively just destroy the tdu.Dependency. It will overwrite it with just a plain 5, a plain number. And we want to change the value but keep the tdu.Dependency object intact, right? So for that we need to actually say self movie count dot val equals len movies folder. And here we need to do the same. We need to say, hey, self movie count dot val equals 0, right? Because we know that when we clear stuff, it will the length would always be 0, right? So now let's try the same approach. So we still have this reference here. So we're referencing the movie count, but before, as you remember, movie count was just a plain integer, and now it's actually a tdu.Dependency object. So now if we say read, you will see it automatically updates to 5, and if you say clear, it automatically updates to 0. So now this is this happens behind the scene, kinda, right? So the only thing that we need to do is we need to specify the correct path to the component that we're sourcing the information from, and that's it. Okay, now let's dive a little bit deeper into tdu.Dependency. Let's say that now we have, so we know the movie count and it automatically updates, which is great, but also what we want to have is we want to have some kind of a list of movie names that we actually what was loaded in the end, right? And I have here like a super simple component, which is just a table dat and then opView that acts as a UI element, right? So this will be like movie list view, right? And I want this list to update every time we actually change the read the new folder or clear it, whatever, right? So how can we do that? And this is where the new feature of TD Dependency Class called callback comes into play. And this again, this was introduced only in the build 2022 plus. So this is why it's important for this tutorial to have the latest version of Touch Designer. So what is a callback? Is a modifiable list of function. So when the dependency object is modified, it calls each function on the list. Each function is called with a single argument, which is a dictionary containing the following: dependency, pref val, callback. Okay, so this is a list of function that gets notified every time that something about the dependency object changes, right? So how can what can we do with it? So first, let's define the method that we want to be notified, like that we want to be called when the dependency object changes. So this method is going to be called on movie count change. right? So this is a typical callback kind of naming convention, like on something something. And we want one argument to be self, and the second argument should be this. Each function is called with a single argument, which is a dictionary containing the following. So it's going to be some kind of a dictionary, right? So I don't know, let's give it the generic name of data and say that this is actually a dict. Okay, and here, first of all, what we're going to do, we're just going to print data. So we're going to see what kind of information Touch Designer passes to us. So now what we need to do is we need actually to somehow connect this callback to the TDU dependency object that lives here. Let's do it like this. So we know that the movie count is a TDU dependency object, right? And actually here it's not returning integer anymore, it returns now the TDU dependency. So now what we can do, we can say, hey, self movie bin dot movie count, right, to get the TDU dependency object, and then we know that it has a member called callbacks. So we say movie count callbacks, and this is just a list, right? List, a modifiable list of functions. So let's say that callbacks, how do we add an element to the list? We call the append method, right? So we say append, and then in parentheses, we're gonna just pass whatever we want to append. And what is expected to be appended is the function. So we're gonna just pass this function here. We're gonna say self on movie count change. And notice that I don't pass the parentheses here, because when you put the parentheses, it means that you want to call this function. So it will call this function, and we just want to pass the pointer to this function without calling it. So we do it like this. We say callbacks append self on movie count change. On movie count change, the only thing that it does currently is just prints the data. Yeah, okay, so and the data we expect to have the dependency, pref, val, and callback info in it. So let's see now how it works in Touch Designer. So now if we do read or clear, we will see that, okay, here's what get printed. So the dependency is a TDU dependency, value 0. Callback is this function that we passed. So it's a movie list view, movie list extension dot movie list extension. And the previous value was 5. So now if we do read, it should give us 5, and the previous value was 0, which is expected. Okay, so it works. And now what we can do is we can actually put something meaningful here, right? So every time movie count change, what we want to do is that we want to first, let's clear the table. Right? And now we say for movie, let's say in self movie bin dot movie list, right? So we iterate over every movie in the movie list. What we want to do is that we want to self table append raw, and the raw should be, I don't remember the exact format, I think it expects the list of values. Let's try like this. Yeah, so now you see, if we clear, it's just gonna clear everything, and then if we read, it will just put the name of every movie that was read inside the table. Now this is, there's an important thing here to keep in mind. So in Python we have this magical dunder method called which is short from double underscore method, and this is like a built-in method in every class that gets triggered automatically various circumstances. So for example, this init method gets called every time the instance of this class gets initialized. So there is a counterpart to this method, which called def del. And this method gets called every time that the object is about to get destroyed, right? So before the object is destroyed, the def del method gets called automatically by Python. So what we need to do here in this method is we need to actually remove our function from the list of callbacks of this object, not to create, you know, this like hanging non-existent functions. So what we're going to do here is that we're going to say self movie bean dot movie count dot callbacks, and then we need to actually remove something from the list, and we do this by saying self movie bin movie count callbacks dot remove self on movie count change. And like this, let's check that we don't have any errors now when we run it.
20 minutes later.
Okay, so I did a lot of head scratching for the past 20 minutes, and what I realized is that for some reason this del method is never get called. So I opened up a previous Touch Designer version, 2021-16-270, and there I was able to confirm that this del method is actually called. Here, for some reason, it doesn't get called, so I assume this is a bug. I will do a bug report after this video. But normally, yeah, you should be able to put this code inside the del function. And every time you reinitialize or recreate or create, like destroy this particular instance of the class, it will remove this function from the list of the TD dependency callbacks for this movie count object. So yeah, it will it should work like this. Okay, so the last thing that I want to discuss about the TDU dependency is collection of items and the deep dependable object. So let's take a look. Let's say that for now what we had for the dependency object was this 0, right? So it was an integer. But you can have a collection of item, which can be also like a wrapped with a dependency object. So let's say that actually self movie list is not going to be a list of strings as it was before, right? Actually, it's going to be TDU dependency object, and it will be a TDU dependency list, right? So the empty list wrapped in the TDU dependency object. So first of all, movie list is now going to return the TDU dependency object instead of list. So we're going to reflect that here. And second of all, each time we want to modify the self movie list, we actually need to modify its val and not the list itself. Otherwise it will again destroy the TDU dependency, just overwrite the plain list over the TDU dependency object, right? So let's say we have like just a basic text. And this text, I want to show the content of this list. So I want to say, hey, I want it to be up movie bin dot movie list dot val, right? So let's enable the word wrap. Okay, so not bad. We see that we have a list of our movies. Okay, so let's say that we want to modify some value. So if we say movie list, it will give us the TD dependency object, right? And if we say val, it will give us just a list, right? And now if I say val item 0 equals, let's say Terminator 3, because why not? So now if we again look, we will see that actually the first file was renamed to Terminator 3, but here it still says movie 1. But how come? It's supposed to be a dependent object, right? So it's supposed to be dependable, it's supposed to auto update. The reason why it doesn't do it is because TD dependency cannot take a look inside of the object content, right? So it cannot say like, hey, something inside changed. It can only see like if the size of the object changes or if the object itself changes somehow. But if the contents inside of this object change, it cannot detect it. So if we update this thing, you will see that it's now reflected, but we had to recook the text to re-evaluate this expression, and now it works, right? So how we deal with that? Well, we can deal with that in two ways. First way is to explicitly call modified. So let's take a look. In the dependency class, we have a method called modified. And what it does is that it will force recook every dependent object, every object that is somehow dependent, it will recook it. So it will say, hey, I know that you don't know it, but actually something inside of me has been modified. So recook please, and like refresh basically the values, right? So we can say like, we can create a function like rename item, and we will say self index and name. And I won't bother with making some like checks here. We're just going to presume that it's all right. So we will say here that self, whenever we call this function, what it does is that it called self movie list dot val index equals name. And what we're going to do now, so basically with this function, I'm recreating the same thing that we just did in the console, right? Where we renamed something. But what we're gonna also do here is that we're gonna say self movie list modified to explicitly, right? To explicitly tell all the dependent objects that, hey, this something has changed, so you might want to refresh the value that you're showing, or yeah. So let's try. So we say movie bin read. Yeah, we see here, and let's try to rename now. So we say movie bin, what was it? Rename item. And we want to rename the item number 0, and we want, 0, and we want to rename it to Dennis. Now you see, it immediately changed it. So this is because of this modified. Okay, so the last thing that I want to show you is what's called a deeply dependable object. So instead of explicitly calling modified, you can make it automatically with a deeply dependable object. So what it does is that you can make a list, dictionary, or a set, and every time something in some element or value of this element inside of this deeply dependable object changes, it will automatically propagate those changes to whoever's listening to them, right? So the same concept as the flat TD dependency object, but works for collection of elements. And there's of course a trade-off of performance, because if you have like, it makes recursively all the objects inside of this dependent list or dependent dictionary dependable, which of course can give you some kind of performance hit. That's why I actually prefer to have the flat TDU dependency object and just to explicitly call a modified method on them. But another way to go would be to create a dependency dependent list class, for example, right? So yes, here it is, dependent list class, and you do it like this. First of all, what we need to do is that we see that it lives in the TD store tools module. So first of all, we need to import this module, right? Import TD store tools. And now we say that, hey, actually self movie list is not a TDU dependency object. It's not a list wrapped in a TDU dependency object. It's actually a TD store tools dot depend list. Okay. Nothing about the way that we interact with it changes now. So we still have this self movie list dot val that we populate with the file names that we read. We still, when we clear the value and make it just an empty list, right? So what we can do now is, if I rename something, do you remember how we renamed something previously and it didn't work? Because we couldn't like pick inside the list and see the changes. So now if I do this, if I change it to like, I don't know, something weird like terminal, now it actually changes. So I can say, let's change the second value, and it's gonna be Greece. I don't know, I have a perfect random word generator inside my head. So yep, here we go. It also changed. So this is the mechanism of deeply dependable objects. Again, as I said before, I really don't like them that much, because I feel like most of the time I work within extensions, and for me it's actually more cleaner and readable to explicitly call this modified method, which will give the same result, right? It will make everything that depends on this value recook and reevaluate. So yeah. Yeah, so there you have it. I will post this example on the GitHub, and the link would be in the description to this video. And of course, like this video, share, subscribe, hit the bell, whatever, blah, blah, blah. Usually you're supposed to say here. I hope you enjoyed this video, and please leave a feedback to it. It would be very helpful to me to see how it went. Was it too technical? Was it too fast or too slow or whatever? Also leave some requests for the future topics that you would like to see me cover in this channel. Yeah, thanks for your attention. See you in the next videos. Bye.